Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen. Welcome to the channel and to this week's review of the latest episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This week, we're talking about episode 4, and joining me to do that, he is one of the co hosts of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, Dan Gvozden. How's it going this evening?
I'm doing great, ready to talk to you about this episode.
Happy to dive in with you, but before we do that, why don't we talk about a couple of other things from last week's episode. Let's follow up. So actually, before we even do any of that, let's talk about what it is we're actually doing here. Okay.
Sure.
Every week on this YouTube channel at youtube.com/DaveChensky, I hop on the broadcaster with my buddy Dan, and we review the most recent episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's a YouTube only show, so you got to subscribe, like, get notifications, whatever, if you want to see it. And we will spoil everything through this week's episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And this week we're reviewing episode 4, The Whole World is Watching. And also, I've given this caveat, but people don't seem to listen to it, which is that we may not like the show. And there's many, many podcasts and videos out there of people loving on this show. And I think we may be a little bit more skeptical and cynical about it. So if that's not what you're looking for, save yourself a whole lot of stress. Check out one of those other shows. I like actively telling people to not watch this before we begin every week. I think that's the
we
only
can
way
only
we
give
get...
you our honest opinions, and
100%.
I think we'd be doing a disservice if we were giving people anything but that.
100%. Okay, so let's talk about one thing. One of the things that happened in last week's episode of the show was so somebody actually commented on last week's episode. Tender Branson said the following, quote, "I haven't watched the full episode yet, but I'm eager to find out if you're going to address the changes they have done to Zemo. He wasn't rich in the movie. He was ex-Spec Ops. He was a soldier, not a baron with a private jet." And I don't know why we didn't comment on it. I guess because I was complaining about too many other things. But Zemo, we should acknowledge, he was a very different character in the show The Falcon and the Winter Soldier than he was in Captain America Civil War, right? Just in his demeanor and in his background. I guess technically it could all be one character, but Dan Gvozden wanted to check with you as someone who's very knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than me. What do you think of what they've done with Zemo in terms of changing / retconning that character?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of really open to whatever, because I think what we got in Civil War was, pretty threadbare. Right? And I'm not saying that he was like a bad character or anything, but he was a man defined by a very specific mission, and beyond that mission and some description of his family life or an occupation, we really don't know much. And I think I was kind of willing to take it on face value that these things could line up. And ultimately, he could still be a baron that enlisted in the military. There are rich people and rich families that have active military lives or engagement with armed forces. But I do think that the interesting thing about Baron Zemo in the Civil War movie was that he kind of seemed like the everyman in some way, like that his family just got killed in an accident.
Not to mention he was like extremely depressed, as far as I could tell, right, in that movie.
Yeah.
This was not a man who was well balanced in any way, right? This is a guy who, like, he had lost everything he loved. He was going on this wild mission that was very self-destructive, and they basically completely changed that all, as far as I can tell. He's more of like a Hannibal Lecter type in this version of him, right?
To that point, he's dancing in clubs.
Yes.
And people are demanding more of that. So, maybe they made the right calculation in terms of like creating an engaging on-screen character that would be dominating so much of these past 2 episodes, right, that they were like, hey, let's make this guy a little bit more of a heartbeat. But it is a little bit disparate. I mean, I think in terms of like, you could kind of, in the comics, we have a phrase called no prize, where if you explain a retcon or a mistake and you figure out a way to make it work, Marvel will mail you a no prize, which is just an envelope with nothing in it. And you
So
could
what you're
probably
saying is there's no glory to be found in spending a lot of time figuring out how this Zemo matches with the Zemo from the movies.
right. It's a no prize, but if you have a no prize, it's a certain there's a certain amount of glory to it in that you got a
Mm-hmm.
no prize.
Mm-hmm.
But
So do you have the no prize here, Dan?
I do not have. For this one,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could square it by just saying like, some rich people, their families do go into military service. I think it's a little bit stranger that like his wife and child got killed in an attack on Sokovia if he's super rich and could like get them to like a safe area or a bunker of some kind. I guess they lifted the whole city up and dropped it from the sky, but it does seem a little strange that like this not this man of the people, this guy with a whole hangar full of cars suffered in some way. But
Well,
I think you're just gonna have to accept it if you have
Victor
a no
Leung in
prize.
the chat says seems not to be a stretch to be both. Prince Harry was in the military. Um, Jesus, Xavier, Turby, Alcala in the chat says Zemo, a regular man that can buy an EMP to blow up a power plant. How is he not rich? I my reaction is I think it's just like there's nothing or there's very little in Civil War that directly contradicts the idea that he's this Baron Zemo, right? Like it could be the same guy. Sure, his personality is really different, but like whatever. And I actually don't mind. I think you're right. Like they made this calculation. Like we could have Zemo be the super dour guy that's super sad all the time. He has a case of the sads, or we could make him be sort of this super fun, happy-go-lucky guy who likes dancing and commenting on American pop culture and stuff. And they're like, which one's going to give us the bigger memes? And it's going to be the one they went with. And I don't begrudge them that. I'm not like, how dare they? I don't feel that way about it. I think it's like, yeah, cool. They decided to like do a hard pivot on the character. And that's
The
fine.
only thing that really doesn't line up, I think,
Mhm.
between the interpretations is in the previous episode, he suggested that he had been hunting Hydra for years, and I'm guessing you could probably find a way to no prize that, but the difference in time, between the events of Civil War and the Sokovia incident in the Marvel timeline is a year. So like it's weird that he would be hunting Hydra and super soldiers for several years if he only really had 12 months. So he was like hunting them before his family got killed. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't really pay a lot of attention to the Marvel timeline.
Right.
It doesn't. I don't really care. In comics, there's a thing called the sliding timeline where Peter Parker's been 28 for 30 years. It's just the most eventful
like if
year of
every
his
comic
life.
book event was like a day and you lined them all
Right.
up, it would be too long for him to have been 28 for that long, basically.
It's the most eventful year in his entire life.
It's like traveling around in Game of Thrones. You just got to assume that it happens quickly and, everything's fine.
Of course.
Let's talk about this week's episode, Dan Gvozden, season 1, or the only season, I guess, episode 4, The Whole World is Watching. Overall thoughts on this episode, Dan? What'd you think?
I thought that, it's funny. I came on the show and I felt like I was pretty positive on the previous episode, but then I rewatched it with my wife who didn't watch it with me the first time. And it just did not hit the same way again. I still think there's some positives.
You're talking
there.
about episode 3, right?
Yeah.
Episode 3 is, I would argue, outright bad.
Yes,
but,
I remember you saying that. I don't know that I'm quite at that level with it yet, but the Marvelness of it really stood out to me on a second watch. That like it's just a lot of people chasing a lot of baloney, which I think is a lot of Marvel movies. You could sum up as MacGuffin goes that way and we follow it. And the characters seemed like they didn't have a lot of they weren't driving the plot. This one I feel like is a lot more driven by the lead characters. The actions feel much more tied to the central question that I think we were getting to in the first two episodes, which is what does it take to be Captain America? Should there be a Captain America? If so, who should it be? The kind of idea of shifting allegiances of power and things like that. And I felt like this one definitely refocused back on what I was more interested in. I still think a lot of the action is really silly, but I felt like the character drama worked for me a lot better in this episode. And so I kind of ended this episode with some problems. Like they really want to make this boat thing happen. But overall, I felt like it was a pivot back in the right direction.
Yeah, I think this episode was definitely a lot better than last week's episode. But ultimately, I think just the show kind of feels like it has a pretty hard ceiling in terms of how good it can be. Because I think that, I mean, we're already in episode 4 out of 6, so they already have to start wrapping things up.
Mm-hmm.
And they have just introduced way too many threads, in my opinion, for all those things to be wrapped up satisfyingly. They fortunately, I don't think they introduced any new characters in this episode. Or no new characters of note, at least, but they're like, as of last episode, they're still literally introducing new characters when they should be like developing the ones they already have, in my opinion. But overall, I like this episode a lot better. I think that it did a decent job of focusing on some of the more thought-provoking questions, like what happens when you get super soldier serum powers?
Yeah.
What does that do to you? What does that make people do? How does that pervert the world order? How does that change the way people act and what people are driven to do, you know? And these are like interesting questions, and I think the show does an okay job of exploring them. And the action's solid. I thought this was like this episode was fine. You know, I didn't have too many big issues with this episode. So, so those are my thoughts on the overall episode. Shall we dive into the show? And I think it's also like, yeah, there are people might be asking, why am I even still covering the show, given that I'm not loving it? And it's because of a promise that I made to Dan Gvozden that I would finish covering this. I mean, we're already 4 episodes in at this point. We might as well just finish the swing, you know? And we're setting a template. This is really setting a template for potentially doing one of these for Loki or something like that, you know?
For sure. And I think that show looks way more promising.
Let's hope so. Okay. So, yep, the title of this episode is The Whole World is Watching. The title comes from the 1968 DNC convention where anti-Vietnam protesters were beaten by cops. And it's definitely something that has a lot of, like, that protest and the trial of Chicago 7 and all that stuff has a lot of resonance today. I think overall, the show is still... The show wants to be about some things that are like really big and important, and I don't know that it has the sort of the heft in its like writing and storytelling to like truly back that up. Like there are some really clunky, god awful lines in this episode, and we'll get to that. But I just like it clearly is like invoking imagery and sort of statements and you know, declarations that are part of American history in a way that like wants you to think it's about something, and people can decide how successful it's about those things. But what do you have any thoughts on the title or anything else before we get into the show?
I think it's flirting with substance, but until it decides to actually like go into that in depth, we're not really there. And I largely think it's because I really feel like Sam has been sidelined for most of this story, even though I think he's supposed to be the main protagonist.
Yeah.
But I do think in terms of getting into the substance, this episode offers up maybe the most yet. His conversations with Karli, which I'm sure we'll talk about, begin to start to kind of paint his worldview, and even a discussion he has with Bucky. And so I can see them starting to like lean into that a little bit more. I think it's a little bit too little too late. And so many of these characters' motivations seem so not fleshed out. I think specifically John Walker, but it's flirting with it. And I just want to see it dive into it. But I think, like you said, 2 episodes left doesn't give us a lot of time to cover a lot of ground we're invoking and bringing in Wakanda at this late stage.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
So you open with Wakanda, and it's 6 years ago, so 1 year before the blip. So that puts it squarely after Civil War, right? But before Infinity War.
Right.
And is it Ao that tries to use the words on him?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. And so she like says the words, and there's this actually really awesome performance by Sebastian Stan. He is acting the hell out of this scene, right? Where she's saying the words and he's trying to not become like an activated super soldier, and legitimately impressive work, I thought. What'd you think?
I agree. I mean, you're seeing such a range of emotions cross his face, and he has to do it all kind of wordlessly. This expression of him fighting this programming that's trying to reactivate itself. And I mean, it's interesting that it seems to suggest that he's overcoming this purely by willpower. I thought, like, my understanding was there was always something maybe a little bit more going on.
I didn't get that impression. I didn't get the impression that he's overcoming by willpower. It's the idea that like he's heard these words, they've activated him in the back. He is wondering if they will activate the same thing again in him. I don't think he's like
Right.
I don't think he's not like straining or anything in that moment. I don't think.
Okay.
Maybe there's a little bit of that, but like it's clear that it's not really under his control, in my opinion.
For sure. I like the kind of remoteness of the scene, and the bringing back the musical cues of Wakanda as they reappear throughout this episode. I don't know. I mean, just the appearance of the Wakandan characters, I think, gave this episode a little bit of a grander scale. Just kind of giving us something new that we hadn't seen before. I enjoyed kind of seeing those characters appear here. It felt a little more tied into the rest of the MCU and not just like a pocket story that was happening somewhere else.
Yeah, well, basically, for people who hadn't watched Black Panther, they wanted to explain who this person was, right? And they could have done it with a kind of boring flashback or something like that, but they actually they actually used a flashback that added to these people's characters. Like, you understand so much more about them. Having watched the scene, you understand, like, oh, she was there, like, nursed him back to health, like, helped him to become deprogrammed. Like, in, like, one scene, you get the whole history with them, and I think that's really good.
It's interesting that, like, they're using this to fill in gaps in the past.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, and I know we've talked about it on this before, that, like, Marvel is really good at yada-yadaing past the most interesting things, like the Hulk healing his battle with himself.
Yeah.
It makes me hope that, like, maybe in the She-Hulk show we'll explore what it was actually like for Banner to heal his two halves in some way.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's like often there's actually like really smart, great storytelling and screenwriting decisions in the show, juxtaposed with just like some of the worst garbage I've ever seen like on TV. And there's just like sometimes I'm like, wow, this is great, like, wow, very smart, really well done, and then it's like, wow, that's awful, and I just get this whiplash watching the show sometimes. But let's talk about what happens with Zemo. So it's present day. AO says like you have 8 hours to like use Zemo, and then otherwise we're gonna go in, and it's like, well, wouldn't it be easier if they just joined forces with the Wakandans to find the super serum? But whatever. Everyone has their own fetch quest they're on. And so they confront Zemo about Nagel's death, and Zemo kind of goes on like a cool monologue about how like you're gonna have to kill Karli. You know that, right? Like he explains his whole ethos, which is like. Which is that you're on an inevitable collision course with these people, and like you must kill them. She cannot be stopped because she has a super serum. And everything Zemo's saying is right. Like, I'm like, this guy, between him and Karli, they're like the smartest characters on the show, right? What were your thoughts on Zemo's ethos as outlined in this opening sequence?
Well, you may see me on the next episode with a T-shirt that says #Zemo was right. Because I think that's kind of where we're heading. But I mean, this is the whole, like, Zemo's getting into the whole, like, the idea of like the fascism of superheroes, that like the people who are the Uberman, suggests more than just being more powerful. It suggests some kind of dominance, and you can take that for good or ill. And I think he makes his point, really, really well. And he says there has never been another Steve Rogers, has there? And I think the
Steve
show.
Rogers is the exception that proves the rule, basically.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there were, what? Forget about all the other Avengers, who also had superpowers and were decent people, But
well,
yeah.
he might argue otherwise, right? Because his family died at their hands,
Yes.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how the show lands on that, because so far Zemo is landing good point after good point. And if the show ends with Sam ultimately taking up the shield, as I imagine it will, they're going to need to combat that point with like a pretty compelling case. And I think Sam is starting to lean into that a little bit here, but I don't quite believe it yet. And I think maybe ultimately the success of the show will be how well it makes that case to us, the viewers.
Yeah, we'll see. So they are trying to find out more information about Danya Madani, because they think like if they find Danya Madani, they're going to find Karli Morgenthau, I think, right? Is that the rationale?
Right. They suspect that because she's a mentor, because Sam had a mentor too, Steve, and they had a big funeral for him or whatever. So they're going to have a big funeral for Danya. And I got to say, this Danya thing feels like a character that was cut out of like a whole plot line that was cut out of the show.
Yeah. Because we know nothing about her. Like we've seen Karli cry about her, but like we have not seen her, no flashbacks or anything, right? It's just, and it's very unfortunate that the show is putting us in the position of like they need to tell us why this person was great versus we understand why this person was great, right?
Right. Even at her funeral, the speech that Karli gives really doesn't give us a lot of information about like what made this person special, other than kind of like vague platitudes.
Yeah, it's awful. And speaking of awful, like these guys are the worst detectives ever. I mean, just it's laughably terrible. I literally was laughing at how bad it was. They walk in, they're like, "Do you know Danya Madani?" It's like no attempt to like blend in or anything like that. And it's like Zemo. Oh my gosh, Zemo is so good. His solution is offer candy to children and then whisper to them about Danya Madani. And it's like, wow, this guy cracked the whole thing wide open. This freaking genius. And that's the leverage he has, is like, I know how to talk to children and get information out of them, and therefore I'm going to keep it to myself so you don't put me back in jail. It's just... It's like much of this show often feels like the outline of something as opposed to the actual thing. It's like, hey, okay, and then they go investigate for Danya Madani, and then Zemo does something really smart, and then finds out who she is. But it's like they literally are walking into places saying, "Do you know who Danya Madani is?" These people have no reason to assist them in any way, right? Like it's just like, this is terrible. This is terrible.
I'm looking at our notes here to talk about this, and it's like bullet points. And I feel like that's what you're watching when you watch a show sometimes. It's 100%. Like, okay. And then there's other scenes where the writers were like, well, let's just lean into this one a little bit more. They like writing speeches from people. And I think the speeches sometimes are very compelling, but it's the how does it get from A to Z that is less so.
And that's the thing. Sorry, go ahead. Finish that.
I was waiting for like Zemo to pull like a copy of like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe out of his like jacket to suggest like why he's interested in Turkish delights. Like that seems like the kind of decision that will be made. It's like, okay, we can kill two birds with one stone. Zemo likes the Chronicles of Narnia, and we're moving the plot forward. And that's about the depth of it.
Yeah. And it's too bad because the Zemo speech from like a couple scenes earlier was like pretty good. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, yeah, I like that you're making him a compelling villain with a easy to understand motivation. But then this whole sequence is just like, it's just awful. This is why I feel like I'm just completely disconnected from the desires of the American people, Dan Gvozden, is because people are watching the show and they're like, this is an amazing show. Freaking love it. And I'm watching it. I'm like, just like, is this not nakedly terrible? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're just walking in there and being like not even trying to blend in, not trying to find any kind of win-win. Watch like The Shield or something like that. Watch Vic Mackey go in and figure out a way to negotiate with people that like. It's just like it's awful. Okay, let's move on.
I would say like at least in like the second episode where he had Red Wing and they snuck into the place, there were cool visuals of, his little, bird plane thing flying around and doing recon. There's no pretense about that here. I mean, I guess they have Sharon Carter like spying from a satellite for some reason. And I couldn't really square that. I am curious, we've not talked about this on the show, but this show is like kind of notable for having like massive reshoots rumored about it. And I don't know if you've heard this theory online of like this virus plot that was cut out of the show. Have you heard about this at all?
Yeah, I have heard about it. Here, I'm going to... Devesh Sood in the chat was saying have you heard this potential cuts pandemic storyline? Yeah, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like, we don't know how Danya Madani died. And there's like, earlier, I guess in the second episode, there was that whole bit about the vaccines and stuff like that. And I just wonder if like maybe some of this stuff, and this is like me really no prizing this, if you will. Yeah. Like, I wonder if how much of like maybe there was stuff of them sneaking through or something, but in a completely different context with, virus and things like that like they got rid of and ultimately had to reduce, because it does, like you said, feel so uneven. I was watching this whole episode looking for like ADR or automated dialogue replacement, which is where like you don't see someone talking, but you hear their voice and lines can be replaced and swapped in and out. And, they typically use this to kind of reshape episodes or movies or scenes, without having to reshoot it. And in the funeral scene, there's a number of like lines from Karli that are done through ADR. And I wondered like if maybe there was like a lot of talking about the virus there, and the whole context of all these moments were reshaped, in the edit to avoid COVID and all the implications of that. I don't know if any of that red flagged for you while you were watching this.
No, I didn't sense that. The slapdash nature of the show is evident to me only in the final product as opposed to the technical aspects of it. However, I did see there was one when the Dora Milaje are fighting John Walker and stuff like that. There's like these few shots of Zemo that are just him on his own. And you don't see him in the environment or with other people in the background. It's just him kind of like drinking his drink and like closing the bathroom door and all that stuff. And I was like, I wonder if that's like reshoot. Like if they changed the plot somehow or they decided to put those insert shots in to make it more clear what was happening. That was the only thing that I noticed.
Right. And he conveniently escapes through like a secret tunnel in the bathroom. Right. Yeah. Like that to me seems like, we threw a line in because we have no logical way of getting him out of here other than to do that.
Right. Well, it's also like very Looney Tunes, like Tom and Jerry-esque that like, the people are fighting. They're so busy fighting that they don't, they allow the one person that they're there to get away. Anyway.
Yeah.
So Sam and Zemo have a conversation, and so we should point out, by the way, that there's like a... Actually, sorry, I just like totally scrolled down an additional page. I apologize. So anyway, Zemo's able to extract the location and the date of the funeral or whatever from the girl there, and then that's when John Walker and his buddy show up, right?
Like, at the funeral.
No. Before, they're like, "Hey, you gotta." It's like now clear. John Walker knows what's going on. They broke Zemo out of jail, and it's like you got to turn this guy in. And now they're all like gonna team up and figure out what goes on. So then they go to the funeral, and Karli Morgenthau's there, and basically it's like, it's all about like what they're gonna do. In terms of confronting Karli and neutralizing her, right? And Sam's like, look, I've counseled war veterans, okay? This is what I do. You have to trust me. And And then everyone else is like, no, this is a bad idea. And this is my issue with the show. Is first of all, like we are way ahead. Like we are way ahead of all the characters. Like and specifically Sam, right? He's like, oh, I'm gonna be able to convince her. Dan Gvozden from the Amazing Spider Talk. Did you for even 1 nanosecond think that Sam would successfully convince her to stand down?
No, not at all. I mean, I knew what was going to happen the minute, like this John Walker guy is a ticking time bomb.
And why would you put all those characters? Well, did you think left unattended that Sam might be successful?
I figured that it would happen exactly the way that it happened, which is like he is successful to a degree, and right as he's about to make success, there's a tragic misunderstanding, and it all blows up because that's how like drama works.
And John Walker's like, I got to go in there. The guy is getting completely effed up, and it's like, what has happened? Why? Like, why do you have to go in there? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like stuff just happens. Like the assassins showing up at the shipping container scene last episode. Like these guys just come out of nowhere. Like stuff just happens on the show because the script needs it to happen. So
I didn't mind the John Walker interrupts their conversation thing because it seemed in character for him. Although what his character is, I'm still a little bit baffled at because he seemed like a well-adjusted guy and he's been like unraveling. And I think I mentioned it on the last episode that we've got these weird handy cam focus shifting shots on him that like suggest some kind of like disoriented mental state. And I'm not sure if that's supposed to just be like the pressure is getting to him. He needs to be Captain America, or if there's like something else that's happening to this guy. Like I would say as a result of the super soldier serum, although he hasn't had it at this point. So it seems to me like he's just kind of buckling under the pressure, or he misunderstands what it is that makes Captain America Captain America.
Right.
But I mean, we can get to like what he says later.
Trying
in
to show,
episode.
The thing is, everyone jumped. Like when I'm reading online, everyone's like, "Oh, well, John Walker's a raging asshole. Like, of course he's going to do the terrible thing." And it's like, for the most part, he seems just like a company man, like a military bro who's trying to do the right thing. And maybe he's a little rough around the edges. But this episode really took him. It really flushed that character down the toilet, in my opinion, in a way that I thought was a little bit too abrupt for my taste. But I think basically what you're hinting at, Dan, is they're trying to show visually what they're not really showing from a storytelling perspective, which is theoretically like the slow unraveling. You don't see like John Walker on the phone with his superiors, them being like, "Look, John, you gotta find this guy, or else your whole Captain America contract is in jeopardy." Or you don't see him on the phone with his family saying like, "Being Captain America is so important to me. It's so important that you finish this, assignment," or whatever. Like it's just you just get a sense that he's kind of a little bit of a dick, and maybe that becomes something worse in this episode.
Maybe his sister has a boat that she needs to pay for.
100%.
Yeah.
Mahesh Krishnamurthy says, the character motivations and the separation of heroes from villains are still really baffling to me. Right now, there's no real difference between Sam and Karli, who both kill people. And there's this amazing scene where, Sam's like, "Look, Karli, I empathize with your mission. I just don't think you should kill people, because if you kill people, you're not making the world better. You're just making it different with, people that are now dead." Meanwhile, Sam like freaking murdered people in like literally the first 10 minutes of the show. I mean, not literally murdered, but he freaking killed those dudes in cold blood, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, but they're bad guys, David. They're bad guys.
Oh, so it's okay if you're a good guy killing people, but like if you're not operating in a conventional government, then it's bad if you kill people.
It just makes me think of the deleted scene from the first Austin Powers movie where like the henchman gets run over by the steamroller or whatever,
right.
and it cuts to his family at home crying over his death, or like an Uncharted game where you spend the whole game killing hundreds of people, but only in the last second in a cutscene does the character relent from killing the bad guy. It's there's some dissonance there in regards to his moral code.
Yeah, Kinchlow in the chat says John Walker needed his own solo episode. He needed the spotlight. Wish the season was longer to give that more time. I mean, the season needs to be longer to give everything more time. But yeah, I would agree. Like, if John Walker got like his own, it would have been great to have an episode just from John Walker's perspective. Like that I think would have helped the show immeasurably, right?
Yeah. I mean, to jump ahead, there's a suggestion that, when he was in Afghanistan and got those, 3 Purple Hearts or gold medals that he got, that it wasn't necessarily done for given for altruistic missions, like that the moral grays of being in Afghanistan, it may make him look, his medals may make him look impressive and morally upright, but that he maybe earned them for doing some unsavory things that the government wanted him to do, kind of more like a Winter Soldier. And that's really interesting, but we have to take it at face value. We didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
And so we don't really know, and maybe we'll get a flashback to it. But until then, we're just writing a character that is a big question mark, who's just acting at this point on impulse. And we can't really feel the weight of that because we've not seen what's motivating that decision and this breakdown.
So there's a big action scene that ensues. John Walker gets up there. There's a big fight scene. And I think one of the characters says, "This place is like a maze." That's how they can get away. And this is actually one of my favorite moments of the show is Zemo shoots Karli. And then there's super soldier serum all over the ground. And he holds one up. And everyone's like, is he going to take it? And I'm like, no way the dude's going to take it. He hates super soldiers. He's going to destroy them. And then he literally did just that. And I'm like, nice job, show. Good job, paying off a character development that you've been doing for a movie and a couple episodes of the show.
David is squarely Team Zemo.
100%. And also, I like it when characters behave consistently within something. Yeah. I thought that was a cool moment. Because you're everyone expects him to do one thing, and it's no, I know this man's heart. He would not take the super soldier serum, right?
And I like the reversal of it too, because earlier in the episode we had this conversation where Sam is asked by Zemo if you had the chance to take the serum, it's setting up you up to think to learn more.
I think that actually happens later in the episode, but yeah.
Oh, am I wrong about it? Okay.
Yeah, because he gets hit with the shield in the head after this scene, and then it's when he's on this couch or whatever that scene happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, anyway, after that, we've got this, John Walker busts in and he grabs the final one and holds on to it. Which,
what's he gonna do with that?
Yeah, well, you don't wonder for too long.
So there is they go back to the cool looking room. By the way, I think they're in Latvia. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean they're in the most well furnished room in this show.
They paid $800 a night for the suite, basically. And the Dora Milaje show up. So Walker shows up. He's like, "Okay, Zemo, you're going back to jail." And then the Dora Milaje show up, and they have beef with Zemo because Zemo murdered King T'Chaka, right? And so they're like, this man must be brought to justice. He can't be walking around as a free person out in the world, right? So they come in, and what I would say is a pretty cool fight scene ensues.
Agree. I thought it was really well edited.
Really well done. Throwing the spear into basically them beating up on John Walker. All the stuff where they beat up on John Walker is really cool. Throwing the spear through the shield freaking arm things. I don't even know how that's possible, but they did it. It was really cool. And
Bucky and Sam just chilling back, letting it play out.
Love it.
Very great.
Love it. Zemo conveniently escapes, but yeah, I love the whole thing. And my favorite moment of the entire episode, possibly the whole series thus far, is John Walker kind of defeated after at one point the Captain America shield hits the floor. And it's ooh, symbolism of America being beaten by the Dora Milaje. And he says the words, "They weren't even super soldiers." He's in complete disbelief. He can't even beat these normal humans, right? But
right.
Granted, some of the most badass humans on the planet, but
they flipped the shield up Captain America style.
Oh my! It was so badass. It was so badass when they did that. So anyway. So yeah, it was a great sequence. Highlighted the episode. Zemo escapes. Walker's like, "What the f am I doing here?" And then you referred to this conversation that Walker and Hoskins had at the cafe, where he's like, "Man, wouldn't it have been great to have the serum?" But Hoskins points out the very logical thing of like, what it does is just makes you more you. Whatever getting superpowers just makes it you squared. Dan Gvozden getting superpowers would be Dan Gvozden squared. It wouldn't necessarily make you a better person, right?
I would be even more bald.
100%, 100%. So then the show really wants to make this boat storyline happen.
Really wants it.
And in this sequence is one of the worst lines of the whole show. And do you know what I'm referring to?
I'm sure I do, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
Okay, so Karli's talking to Sam's sister and is like, "Look, like I need to know if Sam's for real." She's just like, there's no reason for Karli to rope Sam's sister into this, in my opinion. I mean, yes, there's like a basic plot reason, but like it just feels wildly implausible and like as a way to just involve Sam's sister somehow. And she says, Sam's sister says something along the lines of like, "My country has forgotten me," and it's like, oh my God, like this is awful. Like, and what I mean by that is not, hey, art should not comment about the role of poor black people in the country. It's more that the way in which this show does it is so heavy-handed and clunky and unnatural, like in a way that no one would actually say, that it's painful. It's painful.
I like kind of black out every time the boat stuff appears on screen at all because I'm so busy thinking about you watching these scenes. Like I'm laughing at the thought of you watching it enough that it just distracts me. Like mm-hmm. I'm like rolling my eyes for two people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry to ruin it for you.
No. If anything, it's just an additional payload. Like it was not going to work for me, regardless of your thoughts.
Anyway, I thought it was a rough scene, but whatever. They got the sister storyline back in the mix. So, anyway. Let's move on to what happens afterwards. So we're already like running long here, as usual.
Yeah,
as usual. But I guess shall we get to the final like big fight scene? Right. Is there anything else before we get to the final big fight sequence?
I mean, let's just keep moving forward. I mean, because that's the kind of a mode that this story is in. Because like the next stuff that happens, I got to be honest, I am really confused by. I really don't understand the mechanics of what happens in the following scene because, the Karli conversation blew up a few scenes back, but now she wants to reach out to them again, which I guess involves the boat. Like I said, I black out during those scenes. Mm-hmm. So maybe I missed this most important bit of exposition. So like they meet up and I don't really know what she's kind of like. She's hoping that they'll let him go or like that they'll join her. But like, I don't understand like what changed for her from the last confrontation that they had that completely exploded. And then John Walker repeats the same beat from 10 minutes ago in the episode where he interrupts their meeting again.
Yeah.
And they get a phone call from like Sharon who's watching and tells them that like, John Walker is doing something else.
He's on the move. Cap is on the move. By the way, I just want to read that line I was talking about before. I found it. She says, Sam's sister says, "My world doesn't matter to America, so why should I care about its mascot?" That's the line, which is just felt a little bit too on the nose for me. Anyway, okay, sorry to interrupt. Going back to this scene, the first of all, I think this show has characters change motivation mid-scene all the time. Yeah. So in last episode, Sam and Bucky are talking, and they're like, "Hey, Sam's saying like, hey, we can't break Zemo out of jail. This guy murdered King T'Chaka. He framed you. He's a mass murderer. He killed all these super soldiers. Da 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 da." And then Zemo shows up, and Bucky's like, we need him. And Sam's like, okay, let's do it. Where do we start? And literally it happens within like 30 seconds. He just flips on a dime.
Yeah.
And I just think that stuff just happens all the time. It's like, oh, the plot needs them to do this thing. So they do it, you know? So they meet up with Karli, as you were saying, and she says like, join me or like leave me alone. And then before they can even have resolution on it, it's like Cap is on the move. Let's go. Like, I think what wasn't clear to me, and actually, Dan, I think this actually might solve it, is it wasn't clear to me if Cap was in the building they were in.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand. Everything looked very similar. I couldn't, like, all of a sudden they're flying, like, you know, they jump off their flight jets and they're blasting away and running down the street. And Karli has like a face mask on, all of a sudden is fighting them. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I thought we were going to answer that question. What about Cap being on the move?
Yeah, why does that require action? Change? Why does that require action right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird. Like, I just watched the episode. I was watching it with people, my COVID bubble, and like everyone was like, wait, why, what is Cap doing? Like, yeah, it's confused. I could see it being a thing if Cap was on the move and he was showing up at the building and they needed to deal with that, right?
Right, like he's gonna bust up their meeting again, or she felt betrayed that like they had yet again led this guy to her. You know, she gave them a second chance and they blew it. I just didn't understand what the stakes of it were at all.
Yeah.
You know, not to mention that she asked for only one person to show up, and then two people show up, and there's no consequence for that. She's just like, oh, okay, great, like I can trust you guys. And it's like, wait a minute, like, shouldn't there be a like, why even introduce that idea if it wasn't going to build to anything?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because if she didn't say come alone, then she would be inviting, it would be clear that she was inviting Cap to come with them again. But they also needed Bucky and Sam to have this nice moment of like, hey, I got your back, Sam, you know, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So.
Your guess is as good as mine.
A massive fight scene ensues, which is okay, not as cool as the earlier fight scene.
No, not at all, because they're fighting just like gymnast dudes. You know, like everybody's flipping around and kind of vaguely shooting at each other, and fine.
So then, at some point during the fight, it becomes really clear that John Walker has taken the serum for himself.
Yeah, he's like bending pipes in half.
He's bending pipes. He's fighting. Yeah. He's fighting another one of the super soldiers, right? As far as I can recall, and it's clear that he's taken the thing. And that's actually a cool moment that like Sam says to him, like, "What have you been doing?" Or he says something like, "What did you do?" or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
And nice moment, and then so then Hoskins gets killed, a character we barely knew. But what was relevant is we knew that like John Walker was very attached to this guy,
right?
And so then he goes on a rampage.
They did a good job establishing that. Like,
yeah, they did a good job.
I felt a connection between them.
Yep. And that's what makes like what happens next. Like, it's such a weird moment, like when they kill Hoskins, because they throw Hoskins against the wall, and then everyone just stops. Like, oh my gosh, like did we actually hurt some guy? It's like, what did you guys think you were doing this entire time?
Right.
It's like his name is like Edward Norton in Fight Club. He's like, his name is Robert Paulson. Like, what did you guys think was going to happen when you're running around blowing shit up? You know? And for some reason they just stop. They don't continue wailing on Captain America. And Captain America goes over and is like, my friend is dead. And then rather than like them fighting them at their moment of weakness, they're like, okay, well, his friend is dead, so I guess that means we got to get a head start. And so they run away, and then Captain America just straight up murders this dude in cold blood.
Right. Like he specifically takes his shield overhead and uses the shield to bludgeon this guy to death, and gets blood all over the shield.
Now, here's my thoughts on this: is incredibly effective moment, amazing imagery. Like the last shot of the episode with him, like the shield dangling with blood on it. High potential for meaningful social commentary. And also part 4, I don't trust the show to do anything with it at all. Like, uh, everything about it is the pieces for something amazing. And it's like, I feel like the show is just so confused in what it's trying to say about military power, about superpowers, about being black in America. You know, it's just, I don't know that anything interesting is going to happen here. But curious what you have to say about this very shocking ending.
I mean, I thought it was shocking. I mean, I expected it because the comics go in a similar direction, which I could talk about.
Yeah, hit us, Stan.
Okay, sure. So, in Captain America, and this is all from the same era that we've been talking about, like 1980s Captain America. In issue 321, Steve Rogers had to kill this group called an agent from this group, Ultimatum, who was kind of like threatening a family. It's very similar to the final scene of Man of Steel, where Superman is so-called forced to kill Zod. In this instance, Steve Rogers had never really killed anyone before, and throughout the MCU, we've seen Steve Rogers kill people fairly regularly in the same manner that Sam killed the guys in the helicopter in
Yeah, but
episode
it was
1.
like during war, theoretically, right?
Right.
Yeah, or in a hostage situation or whatever, right? Like he generally only kills when it's necessary.
Right. And, in the comics, Ultimatum are kind of like the comics equivalent of the Flag Smashers team. The Flag Smasher is like one guy in the comics, but Ultimatum was a group similar to these Flag Smashers. So, this was Captain America's first time really killing someone publicly and outside of a war setting. And the comics followed up with like him getting really bad press.
Mm-hmm.
And one of kind of like it's like one of the threads that, or the straws that broke the camel's back that got Captain America to kind of retire and allow U.S. agent John Walker to take his place as Captain America.
Fascinating.
More directly tied to this, though, is in Captain America issue 345. John Walker's parents are kidnapped by a far-right group called the Watchdogs, and they're killed when John Walker tries to save them. I think that they're like the equivalent of the Battlestar Hoskins character in this. It's like that's the thing that kind of like puts him off the deep end, and he goes about and brutally murders the Watchdogs in the comics, and specifically with the same visual imagery that you saw in the show, where he raises the shield like with two hands over his head and bashes in like a guy's face bloodily, and he has the bloody shield there as well. And the kind of bloody shield or broken shield thing we've seen in Captain America: Civil War, the movie, but famously in the comics, the end of Civil War issue number 1 has Cap with kind of like a bloody shield at the end of the comic, signifying that he had kind of turned against the state and was a rogue agent. So this is kind of a visual image that the comics have used many times appearing here. So, in regards to my feelings about this, I wasn't entirely shocked because I had read those comics and figured, okay, they're bringing John Walker into this. His role is really to be a bit of a more far right, looser cannon to take on the Captain America persona without Steve Rogers' nature. So I figured it was only time until something like this happened on the show.
I thought it was a great moment. Like when I say great, I mean really effective moment. Like it feels pretty earned, which not a lot of moments in the show feel earned, and this one felt really earned. Like I totally get why that character would react that way. The way the scene was shot and edited was really good. Like the way they used the shield iconography and how they framed the shield and the composition, and that last shot is obviously really chilling.
I actually thought, like, overall in terms of like the visuals, that this episode seemed a little more deftly handled than some of the previous ones. Some of it had like visual spectacle, like Madripoor was kind of pretty looking, but in terms of like scene construction, this one felt a little bit more like reined in and controlled. Especially that like fight scene with the Dora Milaje. I felt like this one had like some peaks in regards to that. And overall, I find the show is kind of like it's like it's like a team, like a soccer team where every player is playing for themselves, and sometimes that can work out in its favor. You know,
Who are the soccer players in this analogy?
well, like like different departments. You know, like sometimes the action choreography like really wows you, and you get caught up in it for a moment. Or Sebastian Stan is doing like really putting himself into a moment. It's like peaks and valleys. You know, like sometimes certain players are allowed to really do something amazing to make up for what I think is a pretty like ho hum script. That but then again, sometimes I don't know who wrote what scene, but like some scenes will really sing with the writing, and they'll have a really interesting conversation about the power structures and things like that. It's a little all over the place, but it feels like only one person can have the ball. If I'm to stretch this metaphor, only one person can have the ball at one time. And this final scene works because it's wordless. Like nobody's saying anything, so the director is getting to do something cool visually. I don't know. It's like only one thing can be good at a given time.
Interesting theory of the show. I like what the Vicious Ocean in the chat has to say. Quote, Rogers is the ideal America. Walker is America. Sam can represent the ideal America in 2021, but black history in America still weighs heavy on him. He needs to understand why he's perfect, end quote. I like this idea of Rogers being the ideal America and Walker being the real America, right? And I think that's actually really astute. Thanks, the Vicious Ocean. The idea that like Rogers is like he fights for good. He's noble. There's no bad qualities about him. Walker is the real America. He's moody, hopped up on lots of drugs, willing to kill seemingly capriciously, and doesn't really give a shit if it happens while lots of people are watching and filming.
It sounds like a setup for a Boom Goes the Dynamite that you've got cooking there.
Yeah, indeed. But I am curious. The show seems to be taking the perspective of, hey, getting superpowers is inherently corrupting. Because they're making Zemo's speech about that topic seem very sympathetic. And they're also making it so that John Walker, the moment he gets the powers, he's literally like murdering people in front of others.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a pretty hard message to convey when your whole franchise is built on good people getting superpowers, in my opinion.
I mean, I think it's a little complicated. I mean, WandaVision, I think, certainly kind of complicated that. That was a story about like a selfish person with powers. I think.
We'll see. Just look at the last episode of WandaVision to see how well they handle that, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. No. That's a good point. Although, ultimately the show doesn't judge her as much as it should. But
yes,
the final moment with her still sees her using those powers, I think, selfishly and potentially dangerously. So I think they punted it a bit in a way that wasn't very satisfying. I do like this parallel that you set up between these characters because it is something that has long been, handled within the comics and I think even in the movies a little bit, is that like Steve Rogers is really about like the idealism of America. Like he is justice, so he doesn't go along with what the government says. He is He fights for American idealism in the comics too, right? He like his biggest enemy in the comics are often American soldiers, not foreign interests. If it's not the Germans or their descendants, he's typically fighting some twisted version of himself. There's John Walker. There's a character named Nuke, who is a guy that literally has an American flag tattooed on his face and is like this like really militant war guy. They tried to do him in the Daredevil TV show and the Jessica Jones TV show. But it doesn't mean he couldn't show up here. But it's interesting that like Cap tends to fight twisted mirrors of himself more than anything else.
Indeed. Too bad we're not going to really get to see them go against each other. Probably, I don't think Chris Evans is going to make an appearance here.
No, I don't think so. Speaking of which, the last real like kind of like dangling thing I think before we wrap this up, because I assume we're wrapping it up, is the Power Broker still has not made an appearance yet. 4 episodes into this, although we hear constant ramifications of what the Power Broker thinks. The number one thing I've seen online is people are like, Sharon Carter is
She
the power
is the power
broker.
broker, right? That's what people are saying.
That's the new, like, Mephisto is behind everything in WandaVision.
Complete nonsense. I would bet all the money in my pockets, which is $0, but I would bet this container of Tic Tacs that Sharon Carter is not the power broker. That's my guess.
I think if you're using like Scooby-Doo logic, she is, because she's the only person that showed up that doesn't really have a clear role defined in the series yet. Like, she's the only other person you can point to, but I suspect that we're going to get some kind of like military figure cameo from the broader MCU that's going to show up, so they don't have to establish who this person is. They can throw someone in, and it's like General Ross or something like that that is like running the general, or whatever, the global repatriation, committee, or we get a Robert Redford reappearance, and that way we could just get right into it. We know this guy. They're in charge of like this thing that looks like it's doing good, but really it's in charge of controlling power around the world or something like that.
Well, let us know who you think the power broker is in the comments below.
There you go. That's how you do it on YouTube.
Thanks for watching our discussion of this week's episode of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. These conversations, Dan, are consistently longer than the episodes themselves. And that is a lot for a show where I don't actually think there's that much substance. I think it's kind of like a cop show. But, here we are anyway. You can find more of Dan's work at AmazingSpiderTalk.com. Check out his podcast. And if you want to support what I do for some reason, I'm like this is actually actively causing me to lose patrons. But if you want to make up for all the lost patrons I'm losing because of this show, patreon.com/Dave Chen is where to do it. Dan Gvozden, thanks for joining me today to chat about this.
Oh yeah, it was fun regardless.
All right. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit that bell icon if you want to get more videos or see the next episode of this recap YouTube show. Until then, see you later.